Microsoft Arizona 700 exam practice questions with explanations are available in the video for you to study. You have an Azure subscription that contains an ExpressRoute standard gateway named GW1. You need to upgrade GW1 to support ExpressRoute FastPath. The solution must minimize downtime. Which SKU should you use? A. GW3AZ. B. GW2AZ. C. High Performance. D. Ultra Performance. The answer is D. ExpressRoute FastPath is a feature that bypasses the gateway for faster and more direct data paths from your on-premises network to Azure Virtual Networks. To use FastPath, you must meet certain requirements, the most important being the correct gateway SKU. According to Microsoft documentation, ExpressRoute FastPath is only supported with the ExpressRoute Gateway SKU, Ultra Performance. GW1AZ, GW2AZ, GW3AZ are standard SKUs that do not support FastPath. High Performance also does not support FastPath. Only Ultra Performance supports FastPath. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1. You need to capture all the network traffic of VM1 by using Azure Network Watcher. To which locations can the capture be written? A. A file path on VM1 only. B. General purpose v2 standard only. C. A block blob premium account only. D. General purpose v2 standard and a file path on VM1 only. E. General purpose v2 standard and a block blob premium account only. F. Blob storage, a file path on VM1, and a block blob premium account. The answer is F. Azure Network Watcher's packet capture feature allows you to capture network traffic on a VM and save it to different destinations for analysis. You can store the captured data in a local file path on the VM. The packet capture agent can write directly to a specified file on the VM. Azure Blob Storage, General Purpose v2 Standard or Premium Block Blob. The capture can also be sent directly to Azure Storage for long-term retention and analysis. You have an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named RG1 and a virtual network named VNet1. You need to deploy Azure Firewall to RG1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do first? A. Create a secured virtual hub named Azure Firewall Hub. B. Create a new resource group named Azure Firewall Resource Group. C. Create a new virtual network named Azure Firewall Network. D. On VNet1, create a virtual subnet named Azure Firewall Subnet. The answer is D. To deploy Azure Firewall into an existing virtual network, VNet1, the first and required step is to create a dedicated subnet named Azure Firewall Subnet. Azure Firewall requires a subnet with the exact name, Azure Firewall Subnet. This is mandatory and must exist before the firewall can be deployed. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine named VM1 and a network security group, NSG, named NSG1. NSG1 has the default rules configured. VM1 runs Windows Server and contains a single NIC named NIC1 NIC. Is associated with NSG1. You need to prevent access to the Azure Instance Metadata Service, IMDS, REST API on VM1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you add to NSG1? A. An outbound rule that blocks traffic to an IP address. B. An outbound rule that blocks traffic to a service tag. C. An inbound and outbound rule that blocks traffic to an application security group. D. An inbound rule that blocks traffic to an IP address. The answer is B. The Azure Instance Metadata Service, IMDS, is accessed from within a VM at the special IP address 169.254.169.254. This service provides metadata about the VM and is often used by tools like the Azure CLI, SDKs, and VM agents. To block access to IMDS from within the VM, VM1, you must block outbound traffic from the VM to the metadata service. The easiest and most maintainable way is to block using a service tag. Your company has 40 branch offices that are linked by using a software-defined wide area network, SD-WAN. The SD-WAN uses BGP. You have an Azure subscription that contains 20 virtual networks configured as a hub and spoke topology. The topology contains a hub virtual network named VNetL. The virtual networks connect to the SD-WAN by using a Network Virtual Appliance, NVA, in VNetL. You need to ensure that BGP route advertisements will propagate between the virtual networks and the SD-WAN. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you implement? A. An Azure VPN gateway that has BGP enabled. B. A NAT gateway. C. Azure Traffic Manager. D. Azure Root Server. The answer is D. In this scenario, you have a hub and spoke network in Azure, with VNet1 as the hub. An SD-WAN connected via a Network Virtual Appliance, NVA, in the hub. The SD-WAN uses BGP for dynamic route advertisement. Your goal is to propagate BGP routes between Azure VNets and the SD-WAN via the NVA. Azure Root Server is the best solution. Azure Root Server allows BGP peering between your NVA and Azure's virtual network routing, automatic route propagation from the NVA to Azure route tables and vice versa, simplified management, no need for manual route table updates. It's purpose-built for scenarios like this, using BGP with NVAs in hub and spoke topologies. You need to configure FD1 to provide user access to app2.prozware.com. The solution must meet the security requirements and the general requirements. What should you do first? A. Add a custom domain to FD1. B. Add a security policy to FD1. C. Request a certificate from a trusted root CA. D. Export the TLS certificate and the private key from app2. The answer is A. You're configuring Azure Front Door, FD1, to provide user access to app2.prozware.com, and you need to meet security and general requirements, typically meaning HTTPS access, custom domain setup, secure routing, etc. Steps to configure custom domain access with Azure Front Door. 1. Add the custom domain to FD1. This maps app2.prosware.com to the front door endpoint. Without this step, front door cannot serve requests for that domain. 2. Validate domain ownership via DNSTXT record. 3. Configure HTTPS. Either using a front door managed certificate or by uploading a custom TLS certificate. Most cases now use Azure Managed Certs, which do not require manual certificate export. 4. Add a security policy, WAF, if needed. This is after the domain is configured. You need to configure a custom rule for a PPGWIWAF policy to allow only connections that originate from FD1. The solution must support the planned changes. Which match type and match variable should you select? A. String and request cookies. B. IP address and remote adder. C. String and request headers. D. Geolocation and remote adder. The answer is C. You want to configure a custom WAF rule on a PPGWIWAF policy associated with an application gateway, and you want to allow only traffic that comes from Azure Front Door, FD1. This setup is common when Azure Front Door is used in front of Application Gateway for global routing and caching, while App Gateway handles backend logic and security. How to restrict traffic to Front Door only? Azure Front Door adds a special HTTP header to forwarded requests. X Azure FDID or X forwarded for can include FD's IP address, but often multiple values. This means you cannot reliably restrict by IP address, because Front Door uses shared infrastructure and IPs can change. Microsoft recommends using HTTP headers, like X Azure FDID, to verify that traffic came through your Front Door instance. You need to configure APPGW1 to support end-to-end encryption. The solution must meet the security requirements. What should you do? A. From the SSL settings, upload a TLS client certificate that is issued by the internal root CA and includes the full certificate chain. B. From the backend settings, upload a wildcard TLS certificate that has a private key issued by the internal root CA. C. From the backend settings, upload the internal root CA certificate. D. From the SSL settings, upload a TLS client certificate that is issued by the internal root CA. The answer is B. You want to enable end-to-end encryption with a PPGW1, Azure Application Gateway, meaning HTTPS from the client to Application Gateway, and HTTPS from Application Gateway to the backend servers, App Service, VM, etc. What you need to do for end-to-end encryption on the backend. Application Gateway needs to validate and encrypt the traffic to the backend. For this, you upload a TLS certificate, with private key, on the backend HTTP settings in Application Gateway. This certificate must match the backend's SSL certificate, the one installed on the backend server. Often, a wildcard certificate or specific certificate issued by the internal root CA is used to secure multiple backend servers. You need to manage connectivity from NYCnet to the Azure services that use private endpoints. The solution must meet the security requirements. What should you do first? A. Add a route table to subnet place. B. Enable a network policy for subnet PE. C. From Azure Virtual Network Manager, create a security admin configuration. D. From Azure Virtual Network Manager, create a network group that has member type set to subnet. The answer is B. You are trying to manage connectivity from an on-premises network, NYCnet, to Azure services that are exposed via private endpoints. Your goal is to ensure that traffic from NYCnet can correctly route to these private endpoints, while also meeting security requirements, likely minimal exposure to public internet. Key concepts. Private endpoints allow Azure PaaS services, like storage, SQL, etc., to be accessed privately over the Azure backbone. To access private endpoints from on-premises, you typically use a VPN gateway or ExpressRoute with private peering, a custom route table that routes traffic destined for private endpoint IPs to Azure instead of trying to send it to the public internet. Why add a route table to subnet place is correct. Subnet place likely connects to your VPN or ExpressRoute gateway. You need to ensure that this subnet knows how to route traffic to the private endpoint IP ranges, which are not publicly routable. A custom route table, UDR, can redirect traffic for private endpoint IPs to Azure's virtual network infrastructure instead of the Internet. You have an on-premises server named Server 1 that runs Windows Server. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet 1. You plan to connect Server 1 to VNet 1 by using Azure Network Adapter. You need to minimize how long it takes to deploy the adapter to Server 1. What should you create first? A. An Azure VPN gateway. B. A root server. C. A private endpoint. D. An Azure Bastion host. The answer is A. Azure Network Adapter uses a point-to-site VPN to connect an on-premises Windows server to an Azure virtual network. To set this up, you must first create an Azure VPN gateway, which handles the secure connection. Without it, the adapter cannot be deployed.